I have asked that it's not me again, but we would love for another voice to report back what we're listening from this breakout session. So may I have a volunteer to do that, or I nominate blindly to someone first on my screen? Anybody?
Sure. I'll take some notes and try to summarize. This is David.
Okay, thank you, David, for doing that. All right, so you will be our official a report back person, and then we have someone doing actual note taking. So I appreciate that. So let's go through the first question that we have, and the first question is, what are your biggest concerns about the bridge? And we have these questions drafted from the feedback that we have received from task force members that we don't have enough time to go through as a community task force and voicing our concerns and voicing our ideas. So I am hoping that we could have full participation. This is our time to talk and provide this feedback to the city. So anybody would like to start? Don't be shy.
Sure, I'll jump in. So a couple of things I've been hearing from the local business community and my neighborhood, all my customers throughout all the neighborhoods in West Seattle, is one that the task force hasn't really had in-depth conversation. So a lot of people kind of, and this is more task force driven, feel it's a little more for show than substantive. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk a little more in depth about things. Start with that. One of the big concerns I've heard is that the request for qualifications that were sent out from SDOT looks very slanted towards bridge instead of tunnel. I know Heather's been changing the verbiage up on a Duwamish crossing or mentioning that a tunnel is in there. My concern is not that SDOT's not taking it seriously, but that if it's not communicated properly, it's going to cause the public to get behind an idea. And then if it doesn't get picked, that it becomes lawsuits or people throwing wrenches in and keeping us from moving forward. So I'd really like to see that the conversation is more inclusive, even if it doesn't happen, more inclusive of the tunnel option, even in just the verbiage that's being picked by SDOT and the communications, so that we don't get into challenges of EIS and other things that are gonna hold this process up more. I think everyone wants to see a fair process play out here and that everything was given its proper evaluation. And I can see where the argument's coming from the groups that are saying that the tunnel is not being adequately looked at, which is perception, probably not reality. But I think SDOT, Sam, I think probably heard this feedback, but like SDOT can do a better job including the verbiage in there to keep this from becoming a lawsuit that delays this another year or two. It's a big concern for folks right now. There's a balancing of the freight community and the business community of getting people in and out of West Seattle, and then of course people who need to work outside of the island. I think lower bridge access is something that hasn't been discussed enough or communicated clearly enough back with public on what's going on with that. So those are the two really big things I'm hearing. And also people are going to riot if there's a toll. Has been very clear from my customer base and people I speak with. West Seattle's had 12 years of traffic disruption between the Spokane Street widening, the viaduct teardown, and now this wonderful project. If we're going to get charged for being disconnected from the rest of the region, it's gonna be a hard sell for folks. I understand the need to sell bonding capacity with that revenue, but man, let's I don't know. Let's get some lobbyists back in the federal end and try to help out getting money over here. So that's roughly what I'm hearing. Just kick off the conversation. Clean, are you talking? If you're speaking, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just thanking you for your awesome 3 points and also encouraging for the others to kind of maybe mix the 1 and 2 as you did 1 and 2 questions of the biggest concerns, but also what you're hearing from community and constituents. I think that's a good way to go, and I appreciate it. Who else would like to go? And those are great points.
I've heard a couple, this is Tim from West Seattle River. I've had a couple people wonder why things are taking long. My main concern is bridge or tunnel. We need to find out like a timeline, which one's going to take longer. You know, most people are damn the cost, let's just get something built. So if we can get a timeline of how long a bridge would take versus how long a tunnel would take, we can push for one or the other based on that.
Mm-hmm. So pretty similar to like what Dan was bringing up of like we're not hearing anything on the tunnel really, just on the break and replace. Or okay, thank you.
This is Greg. You know, I think for the Georgetown community, you know, obviously a decision is important. Making a decision is important, and understanding timelines. I think echoing what others have already said, but for us is, I think equally important is just the mitigation while the bridge is closed for all of the communities impacted. You know, what are we doing? How do we, you know, deal with this traffic? How do we create other modes of transportation? So I think that's something, you know, for us that's very important. Because regardless, you know, while the bridge was down and, you know, we're in this process of building, you know, something new, a new structure, or even, you know, retrofitting and, you know, fixing it, right, so to speak, it still takes time. And so while that's happening, we got to figure out what to do with the vehicles that are on the road, because it's getting worse every day. And so I think that's very important for us. But yes, in regards to kind of what other people said, just really having a clear understanding of, you know, the options, the cost analysis for each, and timelines, so we can really see that and be able to give some legitimate feedback and input on those.
This is Marcy, and you know what I hear from a lot of people is just general concerns about getting across and time for crossing. I'm glad that we're doing this breakout session, and I hope we can do more things like this, because and there's really a lot of echoing going on right now. I don't know where that's coming from, but okay, there it's gone. But it's really hard in the general task force meetings to digest things and then raise something. I just feel like I have a hard time doing that. And you know what I hear from people in the Admiral neighborhood, of course, is wanting direct bus service downtown. I think with the low bridge communication, it would help to make something really, really graphically clear about how little more capacity there is for the low bridge, because I don't think people understand how limited there is for more capacity on the low bridge. And then just a FYI in terms of process in our meetings, because I use a screen reader to access information, which means if I go to chat or Q&A, I have to listen to what that's saying, plus listening to the meetings. And I'm very talented and multitasking, but listening to two things intently at the same time is not one of my talents. So just a FYI, if there are important things in there, someone would just please read them or say them out loud. Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder, Marcy, about that we are repeating things and questions from the chat. I really appreciate that reminder.
Yeah, this is David. And Marcy, yeah, appreciate that reminder. And the only thing in the chat for this, or the Q&A for this group, is if we're going to consider tolling for the West Seattle Bridge, would we also consider tolling Fremont, Montlake, Ballard, et cetera? So that was something that was raised. I think for me, it's really the concerns that I'm hearing are just timeline, right? It's sort of everyone wants a solution now, and the timelines are crazy for folks who want a solution now. And so I think just continuing to provide really boiled down, clear timelines for things so that people's expectations are tempered, while we also, like, you know, figure out all this mitigation through neighborhoods and stuff. I think that just is going to take a lot of attention, because we're going to be in this for years. And then one other concern is just some of the alternate forms of transportation. I'm not sure, I need to go back and look, but you know, it's a lot more sort of bus based transportation, which in light of COVID is challenging. And I'm not sure that all of those alternate forms of transportation sort of recognize the space and time that we're in right now, which is the time that we're in right now to deal with this. So I think that sort of new formula of trips feels a little ambitious considering everyone's comfort level. So those are my two main distilled points.
Thanks, David. Do you feel like you also brought what you have heard from your constituents already in your statement? Yes? That would be mostly the forms of transportation. I think that's what you said, right?
Representing constituents in that? Is that what you're asking?
No, I asked even the questions and your comments were you already referring to the question, what you've been hearing from communities or your constituents. Yeah. Those
reflect that as well. I do think that there's a lot of the information that we've been getting and processing is pretty technical, and I think when we're going out to community to get input, boiling that down even more to make a clear ask of what input we're trying to get from everybody will be really helpful for folks who will have input but don't think about this nearly as much as any of us.
Wonderful, thank you. Looks like Board Commissioner Friedman has his hand up.
I think you can hear me now, yes?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Paulina. And I would like to just reiterate the fact that when I said we are concerned is about keeping our terminals, access to our terminals, it's the public's terminals. And we have a great amount of jobs and interest involved with accessing these terminals, both along the West Marginal as well as along the Harbor Island area. So the thing we're hearing from our terminal operators is, of course, to maintain access to these terminals is of key priority, and to continue to be able to use that lower bridge with this priority, which is, of course, everybody's challenge and who goes first. I think the fact is that it's important to know that there's hundreds of millions of dollars right now on the line with the Terminal 5 redevelopment, and our ability to go from this stage to another stage of development is really the future of the Port of Seattle's container business. If you are not able to have a big terminal, you do not have big ships, you do not have containers in your future, and the longshore and all those jobs that go with it. So it is really an existential threat to the existence of the port, and these short-term moments are of particularly bad timing for us because we are in active negotiations with the terminal operator. So that's key. The mobility to the freight corridors that exist currently, obviously, and the reliability of the lower bridge and the maintenance issues there are critical. And that ultimately, like everybody else is saying, that the Seattle way can kill us. We need to be decisive, and I am hoping that we at least can all agree on that as the goal for now.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate it. And yes, as I know you being an advocate for environment and good environmental practices, I know that the port can play a very good role in like what, those trucks, making them greener and making them less food into the communities that are around. So.
Yeah, Paulina, I meant to say, our ability to the terminal goes through your communities, all our communities. We have to do this in a way that is responsible. I believe that the port has properties that both can potentially help get trucks off the road, as well as get people to things like foot ferries. So the port is very much part of this solution. We are not just saying, you have to protect us. We're going to contribute. And at the same time, we are really prepared to contribute at multiple levels of government. We're not just working with the city. We already are talking to the state and federal government about this is going to take all hands on deck and more than $5 each. Thank you.
I'm going to go, Amanda here. So something I've been hearing is traffic mitigation. Getting in and out for all neighborhoods is very difficult right now, which is brought up several times. And then also timelines, just for repair or replace. People want it seems like quicker timelines. And then I'm also going to bring up real estate. No matter what the decision is, real estate's going to be affected by the entire region. And that's something that we're not really talking about at all. So.
Did your baby have something else to add?
Oh yeah, she's very vocal. This time is kind of time, but that's okay. We're dealing with it,
We
right?
don't have children because they're impacted too, so.
Yeah.
Thank
Just
you.
just a clarifying question, Amanda, are you talking about potential displacement, or what do you, when you reference real estate?
I'm talking about renters, homeowners, property values, everything will be affected by whatever decision the city ends up making. So if it's full replacement, it's going to be catastrophic to real estate. In West Seattle, South Park, Highland Park, Georgetown, Soto, all the areas will be greatly affected. And it's twofold, right? Because there's homeowners that are also landlords. So it will also affect the rental market as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Amanda. I'm also thinking like long-term, how do we put these on the planning and of whatever decision the city is gonna take, and seeing the big picture on this. So thanks for bringing it up. Joe, and then, Joe Fitzgibbon, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, and then Councilmember McDermott.
Thank you, Paulina. So one thing that I continue to hear a lot about, which I'm sure others do too, is the interest by the community in seeing Sound Transit light rail go over the new bridge that's built, if a new bridge is built for a full replacement. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is that people sort of intuitively think that that might be cheaper. I don't think we know that for sure yet, but I think that's something that a lot of the public says, well, isn't one bridge cheaper than two or tunnel? And I think this is somewhat connected with the question over whether, how intently SDOT is looking at a tunnel. But of course, people are also just very interested, knowing the mobility impacts that we're experiencing in the short term, the idea that, if you were able to combine those projects in some way or find some synergy between those projects, that perhaps that could accelerate the completion of light rail to West Seattle. And so I think a lot of people seem to think maybe there's some small silver lining here if there's an ability to expedite delivery of light rail. And I've heard some sort of conceptual reasons why the agencies are going very slow in considering that option, but I think it would be really helpful for us as task force members to be well equipped with, like, what is the state of the discussion of any discussions between Sound Transit and SDOT over the feasibility of that? Is that being looked at seriously, or is that just a non-starter because of how the timelines for both of those projects exist today?
Thank you, Joe. David, did you get all those? Yeah, we're good. Those recommendations. And you feel like you also represented your constituents on the couple of things that you brought from the light rail and the connection to Sun Transit, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Councilmember McDermott.
You're muted.
Joe, you're muted. We can't hear you, buddy.
There we go. Thank you. Hey, I've heard so much of what's already been said from constituents and neighbors and conversations as well. The one new piece I would add is also ongoing conversation long before the bridge closed, and heightened concern now that the bridge has closed and traffic on West Marginal Way has increased, but about the pedestrian crossing and pedestrian safety along West Marginal Way, and particularly at the Duwamish Longhouse. And the Duwamish Longhouse is interested in having a signaled crosswalk of some sort there, but pedestrian safety generally up and down West Marginal Way. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up and how urgent that is. You know, we already seeing, as we've heard from many of you, the impact on traffic from all these. Seems like we also need to be prioritizing on making maybe spaces of how do we are going to engage with our communities on this neighborhood prioritization and community. So I feel like we heard from most of us. So from oh, hold on one second. Marcy, did you want to say something else? And also, Charlie, are you here? I know that we've been emailing each other if you're in.
So this is Marcy. I just had one other brief thing that I've been hearing from some people about the repair versus replaced, is that in the rush to do something quickly, that we would just be putting off the big impact of getting a new, the benefits of getting a new bridge, that we would just be putting that off for only a few years.
Yeah, I would completely second that notion. And I think the neighborhood that I'm representing is at this strange nexus of being the terminus of the West Seattle Bridge as well as the new Sound Transit light rail. And so exactly as Representative Fitzgibbon said, our neighborhood especially sees the opportunity that if both of these infrastructure projects are going to be generational in their timelines, it's not just the time of construction, it's that they're going to be with us for generations, that in order to save a couple years, but to end up with a mediocre project that lasts for 20, 30, 40 years doesn't seem like the pertinent thing to do. And so especially in that conversation of making sure there's dialogue between the bridge and Sound Transit to make sure that these two major pieces of infrastructure that are coming to West Seattle are done so thoughtfully, is mostly what I'm hearing from my neighbors.
I wanted to throw in one more thing I could, just going first, you forget some stuff. So two of the big things I've also been hearing a lot is we're putting out graphics saying that we want to increase metro ridership and use of other or alternative modes of transportation. At the same time, we have bus services at limited capacity and routes cut. And so I think the only thing I've heard in the task force meetings is we're in talks with Metro. I think the community would like to know a lot more of what those talks look like. Because quite frankly, we can say let's ride buses if we don't have the capacity, or we don't reroute how Admiral or Alki can get to where they need to go. Do we need to look at a collector role where smaller buses get everyone to the junction and then the junction is just running rapid ride out of there? How do we get that work going? And we're not getting any of that information from Metro at the moment. On the bike commute aspect, I just bought an e-bike for my wife, who's a nurse up on Capitol Hill, and she started talking to other people that commute from West Seattle via bike, and a lot of them jump on at Lander Station because it's not easy to get up on the top of Capitol Hill, and they'll jump off on Broadway. And one of the things they've mentioned is capacity for actually bringing bikes onto the rail. A lot of times isn't there. So we're now have a lot more people trying to take bikes, and they're not going to bike all the way from A to B. Is Sound Transit looking at adding capacity for more bikes to be on the light rail to help move people around the city? We're using light rail to get over, or bikes to get over the bridge, but then light rail to move around the city closer to their final destination. For people missing several rail trips because they didn't have the ability to get a bike into the bike storage areas, what the policy is like on that. So I'd love to hear more from Sound Transit and Metro on what they're going to do to support the goals that we have laid out for change transportation.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And one of the things that we had expressed at the beginning of, I think it was meeting number 1, is why don't we have a Metro representative? But actually, we saw that Councilmember McDermott is representing Metro, but I agree with you. We should be hearing more, especially with now that we're talking about this DTV, like the new proposal Mayor Durkin sent yesterday. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Let's see. Joe, did you want to talk something again? I see your hand, or that was from before? McDermott, sorry, Councilmember McDermott. I meant Joe. We have 3 Joes. Are you muted?
I'm muted now, and my hand was only raised because I hadn't lowered it after I spoke.
Oh, so you already did. You already went. Okay, got it.
Yes.
So let's move in for a little bit on we have like in the next 20 minutes before we adjourn this section, and a couple of more questions that were here is, how do we think as community should be a good way to get the word out about the key West Elbridge topics like project prioritization? Seems like a lot of us are mostly interested on that, on the mitigation piece. And then the other one is, how can we more efficiently and effectively organize our task force meetings to best advise the city? How would we make it a meaningful experience for us, but also representing the voices that we bring, and we can have meaningful participation in this task?
I'll jump in on this one again as well. I'd love to see, I mean, just personally, I've talked with other task force members offline. I think it might be really helpful to get questions of what we're addressing more than maybe 2 days in advance, and let us go out and do some outreach with other members of our community to get feedback rolled to us instead of what we're randomly hearing and then reporting back. But we can strategically reach out to people in specific areas depending on what the questions are that we're going to be talking about. That way we're not waiting for 2 weeks later to have that conversation. We could be 2 weeks ahead of the game if we had a little homework. I've also talked to a few task force members, and I think I've expressed to you, Paulina, I would rather get out of a 3-hour meeting early than leave our meeting on time with a lot of questions left to ask. Frustrating to not be able to feel like we're moving forward. So, this task force is a working group. I know we're all busy. I'm trying to reopen restaurants and keep places going and do chamber work, but I signed up on here to do work and to help drive results. And I think if everyone's committed to that, we should be able to do a little homework in advance to have more substantive conversations, or spend a little more time for open conversations like this. And I'd be happy to get out at 2.5 hours on a 3-hour meeting if all the questions are answered and everyone feels good about it. So that's my 50 cents on that.
Thanks. I'm making sure I understand that you would love to expand the hours out of what we have, and perhaps dedicate 30 minutes to question Q&A from the members to address what we just learned, so we would be prepared.
I think it's better to plan longer and get out early than to leave without asking the question or having in-depth dialogue. If that's what we're here to do, we should have the space to do it.
Yeah, and we got a lot of back and forth about this, because we are all aware that we're all community volunteers for this task force. It's a lot of time taken from the days, and it takes not only for these meetings, but then our responsibilities to report back to communities. And how do we do that? Do we feel like we have asked SDOT to do a summary of each meeting to share to the community about our discussions, but do we feel like communities trusting these summaries, and that they're providing enough feedback for us to bring it back to the task force? So I think those are all good things to consider and come to an agreement. If we think the longer meetings will facilitate that part, where we will be able to answer questions and take it granted. I mean, I don't know if we would have the responses every time the question right, but at the very least, what would help us is shape for the next meeting, what do we want to address as community task force. So thank you. Anyone else?
I think it's a subtle difference to what Dan was mentioning, but I think just in some ways deliverables, like what ultimately what are the things that this task force is driving towards and the timeline associated with it? Are there specific milestones that we're hitting? Because right now it just seems that we go from meeting to meeting, and each week we get an agenda, and that's as far as it goes. There's not seemingly a bigger vision here of by this date, we're going to be making this decision, and so we need X, Y, and Z in order to lead up with it. So I think having a bigger holistic timeline would be really useful, especially as it relates to reaching out to constituents to know, if I can reach out to Juno and say, hey, by this date, the group is going to be making this decision. So we need to really make sure everybody's voice is heard before then.
Thanks.
Peter Goldman here. Paulina, can I have the floor? Oh, thanks. Just in the interest of efficiency, I'm wondering if we should maybe divide up along the lines of replace, repair, bridge, tunnel, and then versus traffic mitigation, and alternative transportation strategies in the interim. Not everybody is an expert on engineering. Not everybody is has ideas on interim measures. So that would be one way to have a sort of interim measures task force, sub-task force, rather than everybody be involved in everything. That would be another way to divide it up.
Yeah, and that would be to each other interests. Like if you're here because you're very concerned on the mitigation piece, that would be one group, and then the other ones will make the decision on this. So we have considered that too, but this is just our fourth meeting, so I feel like for everyone needs to be first on board and learning what the things are before we divide, but definitely has been considered, should we do subgroups that would make more sense into the two big tasks that we have been given according to what makes sense to each of the groups to deal with. Thanks, Peter.
Paulina?
Yeah?
Fred's hands up. Can I go?
Go, Fred.
All right, thanks. One of the things I've always been concerned about is trying to get people to come to my meetings when in fact, I think our obligation is to go to where people are meeting already and to get invited to be presenting at meetings that are already have their own constituencies. And I do like the idea that Peter just brought up, though, that people need to feel that they have something that they can contribute to. And so maybe initially we go out and solicit people at their various community meetings and let them know that we have like these subgroups that would be, we want your input on. But I think, broadly outreaching to say, have people come to your meeting is a challenge, given that we're all very busy people. So I would like, we all have our own community groups, and if we put together those lists of community groups and see about getting on their agendas, just sending a representative and then giving them a sign-up list for active people, I think there's a way of honing in on that level of expertise. And the area expertise, and so the port has worked with SDOT on this maritime stakeholders town hall. So once you kind of know who your constituents are, you can bring them all together. They have a unified or a subject area of interest. Unified is difficult for even any one constituency. But anyway, so I just think the initial outreach should be going to where they are and then bringing them in on those specific areas, like the categories that actually Peter came up with. I thought were pretty clever. So as a place to start.
I really like the idea of I don't feel as a West Seattleite I have a lot of input or really ownership in giving input to Georgetown. I love to go eat there, but that's not my community. In South Park, it borders one of my businesses, but South Park has a better handle on that as well. So I think when we get into the mitigation things, getting into more of a neighborhood focus on those things is a really, really smart idea to streamline the process and that effectively is everyone's time. So I agree with that. Thank you very much.
Was that Dan? Dan Austin talking? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, my video was turned off. I changed locations.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. But what are your guys? What are your thoughts on the presentations? When we have been bringing the presentations, do you feel like at this point, do we feel like we need a glossary to understand everything we're talking about? I know we're all at different levels of understanding of different things, but it has been roaming in my head, and Greg's brainstorming as the co-chairs. How do we make more accessible the information that we're getting as we're getting prepared for this? But I would love to hear your thoughts on also, because we don't want to have these meetings just for SDOT to come and present and then we adjourn, and this is why we're having these conversations, but also we want to make sure that we have good understanding to report back to the community. So I would love to hear some of your thoughts on these information that we've been getting, and is it too much? Is it too high level? Do we need to bring more into the technical advisory group to explain things to us? All those things are super relevant and important for me to understand as your co-chair.
Although I think so far it's been very understandable, all the information that's been given, at least what's been presented. I don't really, I haven't had any questions on it, so I don't know if that's.
Thank you, Amanda.
And this is Marcy. I think, staff has been good about explaining acronyms. So as long as that continues, that's helpful. And, we can ask a clarification question. And then, hearing from the technical advisory group periodically, and maybe making sure we have people who can help us interpret that in case that gets a little too technical over our heads. But yeah, but hearing from that group periodically, it's good.
Great. And like as to be fair with also the group, I've been talking to some of our group that when we plan the agendas, and would it make sense to bring always the logic of where the timelines are? And I think that's what I heard from you a lot saying today. It would be great to know in advance what we're going to discuss so we can prepare, but also have these thinking of, okay, so if community members just stop me in the street and ask me what's going on in the community task force, what are the main things that I would report back? And that's kind of like maybe something that we as community representatives have to be, facing the public and taking these responsibilities. So what would it be helpful is just to have concise information of our discussions, but also something very informational to bring it back to community and report. So any ways, and only we know how to reach out to our own communities. Like somebody was saying, I'm not an expert in Georgetown. Of course, Greg will know how to reach out to the constituents. I will know how to reach out to my constituents. So it's very important though, that we're all on the same level of understanding and that we're all on the same level of agreement of what makes sense of this task force. Did I see Charlie's hand on, or somebody was trying to do that? We still have like about 10 more minutes before we adjourn and report back. So this is our time perhaps to reflect a little bit on moving forward.
So, Polina,
yeah.
the one thing, obviously this is an evolving subject. It's going to be dynamic for some time. But before we come to these meetings, it's really obviously the time up front, for our staff just to get to digest it. By the time they get it to the commission, we definitely have processing time to go through. And also we want to be able to, like you say, you get stopped on the street, you want to be able to have timely information to be able to share. So I don't know if there may be, in addition to the full briefings before these meetings, if there wouldn't be some way to have, some sort of a breaking news updates. I don't know, a text, go check something, the latest, greatest. Hopefully there is, fast moving information rather than waiting for information. But anyway, some way in which certainly before a meeting like this that we can come, fully armed I think that's really the best use of everybody's time.
Thanks, Brett. And there is this, the SDOT blog, that it's always having very updated information. But what I was referring is, how are you all feeling about the blog? And you feel like that's the site where we want to share to our community that is, I find it very informational and representative of our discussions, but I wanted to have a feeling of you all if you are finding it helpful, and if we need to add something, perhaps like taking our agreement, our notes for each meeting of the discussions being made, or even notes of our discussion here that will be reflected to community notes, etc. Anyone?
The one thing I would add about the SDOT blog, I think it's extremely helpful and knowledgeable. But for example, there was something that just came out during the task force meeting with the SDOT blog. And it feels like, I'm here having, taking time out of my day for this meeting, and the SDOT blog comes out either first or while I'm in the meeting. So I feel like maybe the information gets released to the public first, which is okay. But I think there might be maybe a more diplomatic way of doing that.
Amanda, you hit the nail on the head. I felt the same way. Like, I'm so excited to share something, but it's already out, so I don't feel meaningful because
Right.
yeah, it's so diligent in bringing that information. So, but there should be a way for us to follow up and make sure that our constituents are understanding exactly what that means. But yeah, I felt the same way. Thanks.
Paulina, this is Joe McDermott.
We can hear you. Yay.
I don't want to derail the current question you have out there, but we had the conversation about Metro and keeping the task force up to date on what Metro was hearing, and what Metro is planning. And while I work with Metro closely, I'm not a planner with Metro, and I'm not there on not immersed in the department on a daily basis, if you will. I think we benefit from inviting Metro to come and present to the task force about their plans and their work and some of the conditions around those plans, including the transportation benefit district and funding from the city, and current financial crisis that's affecting Metro like everybody else. But there is deep planning going on, and to make sure that members of this task force are aware of it would be very helpful.
Yes, thank you. I agree, and I think that I would love to have here representatives and do that and report, and also for our community to understand what's happening in the big scale. So thanks for mentioning that, and I'll bring it back to maybe Rob or Vishon. Okay, so what do you guys feel like having a 5-minute break? And then we come back before we go back into the next big group to report back. One of the things I noticed last time is that we didn't have any 2-minute break, and sitting 2 hours is hard. So let's take a 5-minute and come back
Hey, Paulina,
for last minute remarks.
Paulina, before we do that, can we just jump in and say I've really appreciated all these thoughts. I think I didn't want to respond. I don't think we at SDOT wanted to respond and sort of jump in and get into back and forth, but I think we were all listening and taking some notes, and we really appreciate the honest feedback on what we're doing and how we can do it better. So thanks everybody for sharing all these thoughts with us.
Yeah, that was my plan, to bring it back when we come from the 5 minutes, to have you. So on behalf of the CAU, we have asked you to just be observing, but thank you, Sam. So see you at 3:35. Don't come at this one before we go to the large one. And think in your break if you want to bring
Paulina. Hey, Paulina,
Yeah.
I apologize. I just happened, there's the Q&A. So we have some questions that came in from people watching. I don't know if we are tasked to answer those, or if somebody from SDOT may want to take a look and give some feedback.
Oh, that's great.
There's a couple comments in there. So I don't know if someone wants to take a look at those.
Okay, let's thank you for bringing that up, Greg. Let's take a look at them. I don't see them, but I'm sure someone about it.
Yeah, I can respond to the one that was addressed to me. Sorry, I can't actually type into the chat, so I couldn't just quickly respond. I represent Alaska Junction via Juneau and the East Alaska Junction Neighborhood Coalition.
And just from SDOT, I'll add that we do record all of these questions and we share them with the co-chairs, and I realize that we've had some problems with access to the SharePoint, but as we get those fixed, we will be keeping those questions and answers as we have them in the SharePoint so that you can access them later. And some of the more specific ones will have staff answer.
Okay.
And just chiming in for, I think it was Marcy's request to read them out loud. The two that I'm seeing are just removal of bike lanes on Delridge is a concern. And then a question of how do we find out who represents whom? And that seems like something that's more broadly sort of our full list of the whole task force. But maybe pointing public attendees to that so that they could, if they have a question about Delridge, they can follow with me or whoever, you know, whatever. So those are what's in there that I see.
All right. Are we on a break?
I believe so. So yes, we'll you can reconvene in the pickup group by 40 or 1:40. I'm sorry.
You guys even take a break, you're hard workers.
Sorry, you said reconvene there at 1:40?
1:35 actually, we have 2 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to, yeah, give you guys a little break before we go back and for the rest half an hour.